We are now going to move on to Andrew Yang, and I thank you so much for being with us here tonight. I'd like you to introduce yourself, and then I'd like to ask you some questions from our members.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you, Jerry. I just want to express my appreciation for Brad Lander, who I recently supported on his anti-scaffolding bill. 300 miles of scaffolding in New York. It's a public safety hazard. It's bad for street-level retail, particularly now. So I just want to shout out to Councilman Lander. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. We're in the deepest, darkest crisis in living memory. And you all are on the Upper East Side. 300,000 New Yorkers have left New York. And I have a feeling that includes some of your friends and neighbors. The numbers are stark: 700,000 missing jobs, 60 million missing tourists, Midtown Manhattan, 82% unoccupied. There is no guarantee that the city will come back the way that we want it to. We need the right leadership. We need someone who's going to be laser focused on accelerating the recovery and activating resources both inside and outside of government. We need to activate private sector, nonprofit sector, technologists. We need all hands on deck, get the vaccine out quickly and efficiently to you and your neighbors, and then have a means so people can quickly signify that they've been vaccinated or tested negatively so you can get back into the office, restaurants, bars, theaters. New York City is fundamentally a place-based economy. Zoom is not our friend. We have to get New York open for business. I'm running for mayor because I believe I can speed that process up and help give us the city we love back in a form that we'll be excited about.
Well, thank you. And maybe playing on the theme of open for business, I'd like to ask you a question from one of our members, Justin Kirby. What opportunities do you see for City Hall to collaborate with big business in New York in addressing the crises that the city faces?
There are so many crises stacked on top of each other right now. I'm going to identify one that I think big business can help particularly with. And that is the fact that 29% of New York City residents do not have high-speed internet at home. I know that will be shocking to many of you hearing this. You're like 29%. But think about the families who are struggling to educate their children during this time. Online school is 30 to 70% worse than in-person school. It's not good. As a public school parent who has their kids in Zoom school, it's no substitute. But then imagine not having internet. So you can call me the comeback mayor in terms of COVID comeback, the recovery mayor, but I'm also going to be the broadband mayor. We're committing $100 million to get people high-speed internet where they live. And I believe the corporate sector is going to be our partners in this in a very, very significant fashion. The fact is that 99% of buildings are actually wired for high-speed internet. It's just the companies have figured out they can't make money trying to wire the individual households. So we'll put up some money. The companies will put up some money so that they're not going to go broke on this. These are companies that are making billions of dollars here in New York City. So we'll find a point that they can live with, that they'll be able to break even. The consumers will pay in something, but we will get that 29% down. There are a lot of other things that we can get big companies excited about to try and get New York City back on its feet. We have to be working hand in hand with the private sector.
Thank you. Shifting to the issue of the housing and affordability crisis, the homelessness crisis that the city faces, what would you do to increase the production of new affordable housing? Where do you expect it to be built? How will you deal with neighbors who are resistant to the idea of new affordable housing in their neighborhood?
Oh, this is another area where we have multiple crises on top of each other. So you have an affordability crisis that's been going on for years and decades. And then you have a homelessness crisis right now that is being spurred by COVID. So job number one is we have to try and keep as many people in their homes as possible. We should be fighting to extend the moratorium on evictions. We should be expanding right to counsel for tenants. We should be expanding the tenant assistance programs that are already working, because when someone winds up on the streets, it is a disaster, not just in human and economic terms, but the city is spending tens of thousands of dollars per individual per year when someone winds up in that position. A number I just saw today is that a family costs the city $6,000 a month if they wind up in our shelter system. So this is an area where we can spend a lot of money and save money simultaneously because we're spending a lot of money right now on the back end. So how do we speed up the development of affordable housing? This is one area where the crisis can be an opportunity. where right now hotel operators are turning in their keys because there are 60 million missing tourists. They're 90% unoccupied, but they are turning their keys into BlackRock, the private equity firm, because BlackRock is very smart. They smell distressed assets and they come in and procure that hotel. On the flip side, you have the city literally paying $200 a night for a hotel room for someone who is struggling with homelessness and getting a terrible value. So the city should be getting the key from some of these operators, should be loosening some of the restrictions, and then we can be converting some of these underutilized hotels, particularly in the outer boroughs, in more residential areas, into affordable housing so that we don't have to wait years. Because the fact is, if you have various regulations, and I'm for trying to make extreme affordability under MIH more appealing to developers, but we just don't have the time for that. Like, we have a crisis that's getting worse right now.
Thank you. The question from our Deborah Freeman, who co-chairs our Education Action group. What do you see as the three most significant issues facing public education in New York City right now? What would you do about them?
Oh, right now, the most pressing issue is that our schools are closed. And you have kids who are getting left behind further and further. And the data shows a couple things. Number one, it's the most at-risk kids that are going to suffer the most. And number two, the data also shows that small children are not super spreaders of the coronavirus. We should be fighting much harder to get the schools open, particularly for younger and at-risk kids. So that is job one, is reopening our schools safely in a way that works for teachers and families. But as a parent, I believe that we are not following the data right now, and we should be fighting harder for these families in particular. Number two, and so I'm going to expand number one for a minute. If we're fortunate enough to open our schools back up in September, kids are going to come back and they will be very, very behind. But worse than that, some of them will have real trauma and struggles. So we need to invest in social workers and mental health counselors and resources in the schools so that when our kids come back, they're actually in position to learn. We should be exploring expanded schedules because we have to make up that time in a particular way. The second thing is that right now, in my view, we are abdicating our judgment about our children to high stakes tests, and we're doing it in a way that doesn't serve our kids. And I'm not someone who wants to discard the tests, particularly without a ready alternative. I think that's bad policy. But I do think that teachers should be able to identify kids who both need remedial help, like one of my sons who has special needs, or qualify for enrichment programs without that child needing to take a citywide test. We should allow them the flexibility to have enrichment programs right there in those schools, and empower teachers and administrators to look out for our kids at higher levels without giving up their own judgment to a citywide test. The third thing is on the SAT, and the selective high schools. I believe we need to open 2 new selective high schools in every borough, in part so that we expand capacity and then we can have these schools reflect the diversity of our communities, but also to prevent kids from having to commute an hour or more each way to get to high school. That's not good for their learning. There's no reason in a system of 1.1 million children that we need to limit our own capacity when it comes to these specialized high schools. We can easily open these schools in places that are closer to families.
One final question from member Billy Freeland. You've called for more police in the subways. Will you be a mayor that would reduce the role of policing in New York, cut the police budget, and invest in communities that have been historically over-policed?
I believe that we need to do multiple things at the same time, which is going to be a theme in New York City for the foreseeable future, unfortunately. So number one, we do need to invest more in communities. We need to invest in different kinds of interventions. Not every intervention needs an armed police officer. We should have more people who are mental health professionals and substance abuse counselors and violence interrupters who are able to intervene in a situation and not elevate it. At the same time, one of the main concerns that you all have is that violent crimes are rising in New York City, including on the subway. And one of the tougher elements of that is that the resolution rate of these crimes is going down, not up. So that's a terrible place to be, where you have more crime and fewer apprehensions. And so you need to, when you talk about like police and resources and the rest of it, like I think it's wrong to think it's like, oh, I spend more money and it works better. Like, we need to hold the police accountable for catching the perpetrators of these crimes in our communities that are going up. And that to me is a form of police accountability. Say, look, like, rising crime should not lead to lower resolution rates. And so, again, we need to do multiple things at once. We need to make sure our police are smart and effective and not abusing people's civil rights. We do need some reform of the culture of the police department. One thing I have suggested that now is catching fire because it's smart. We should be requiring new police officers to live in the city, and living in the communities, preferably that they're policing. We require that for other city agencies. Right now, we do, and we don't require it for the NYPD. So now people are looking at that and saying, oh, that's smart. It would help build connections between police and our communities, improve public safety. These cops would be commuting to work on the subway. Wouldn't that be glorious? Like that'd be another win. So that gives you a sense of my approach to public safety, which is like one of the core issues behind our recovery.
Well, thank you so much. Obviously, you have so many ideas, and we've given you a very short time to share them, but I appreciate all the ideas you've been able to pack in. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. And if you want to, or a member of your staff wants to put information in the chat or links or something like that, please do so. I
can do it. I'm a full-service mayoral candidate. Actually, I'll tell you all what. If you just go to andrewyang.com, believe it or not, it redirects to my website, yangforny.com. But I'm running for mayor for one reason and one reason only. I think I can get us back on our feet faster. I want to fight to improve the way of life for all 8.3 million New Yorkers.
I'm sorry, Mr. Yang. We're over time right now. So thank you very much for your time with us tonight.
Put the money in our hands. 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 Can we afford it? Yes. Will it cause inflation? No. Is it awesome? Yes. Is anyone trying to make it happen? Yeah, that guy.